Hello everyone, welcome to my analysis of the Atmospheria, the wife cut. So, to give you some context into this, I finished and submitted the original version of Atmospheria 3 days before Moving Ice was released, and you're about to see that version today for various reasons that I'll get into. So, as I said, I submitted Atmospheria 3 days before Moving Ice was released, and the reason why it's called the wife cut is because the subplot about Suypur having a wife and a family in general, I had to get rid of that, and that meant retooling the entire movie from the ground up, basically, because everything that I had to that point was centered around that idea, and we'll get into that. But yeah, basically, you can't have husband-wife relationships in Roblox, and because I was going to be releasing this movie directly to Roblox with CineBlox cinemas, then I had to get rid of it. So, to fill you in, green bordered images, like the one that you see right here, only exist in the wife cut, so that means there is no equivalent to these shots in the regular version that you see in the theater and as well as on YouTube. And so that means all of the images in green have been either replaced or deleted for the regular version. Yellow bordered images like this exist both in the main and alternate cut, but the lines of text were changed, so the context is slightly different. So plain images without a border exist in both cuts of the film, but regardless of the order they were presented. So like some images have been flipped around or some were reused for different purposes. I wanted to recycle as much as I could from the wife cut without actually keeping the dialogue, so I ended up reusing a lot of footage, and that ended up being a good thing. So I saved the wife cut like as a PDF file, like I downloaded the entire Atmospheria slideshow, and so yeah, I've had it saved this entire time. I just didn't have anything to do with it, so I figured, hey, why not make a quick, like, 10-minute video or something like that and just, like, squeeze some content out of it. Alright, so we're gonna go through the main part of the movie, or the opening part, which is just the opening logos and text and stuff. So this is stuff that you can see in the version of the movie available in the theater and on YouTube anyway. So this big block of text was kind of inspired by the opening text for Blade Runner, because there's just chunks of text where it's just red, and that was something that I liked, so I decided to do it for this movie too. But these two chunks of text are the same between the two versions of the film, so it doesn't really matter. And then I really like how I have it just like fade out to just say Atmospheria, because that's something that they do in Blade Runner as well. And then we get to the opening title, or the intro card, and then you'll see that these two images are exactly the same images that are used in the main version of the film, but they're swapped, because in the main version, this image is used as the opening, and then it cuts to this. But then you'll see a third image that I didn't use for the main version, which was this. And the context behind this particular building is it was supposed to be like the it was supposed to be the Astorian Legion headquarters, but you'll see why I decided to remove this particular shot as we go through. So this section of the movie, the street noodle scene, is exactly the same. You know, he starts speaking in, I forget if it's Chinese or Japanese, because I'm pretty sure it's Japanese, but I also think that it'd be Chinese. I don't know. Someone will correct me. The one thing that bothers me about this part is that the bowls are just cylinders, like cylinder parts in Roblox. I didn't put any detail into the bowls, and that's what bothers me. But, you know, I've learned from my mistakes since then. So then these two cops show up out of nowhere, like literally out of nowhere. You can see behind him in the previous picture, and then they just show up. It's like they teleport. And the German guy, you know, he says the same thing between the two versions of the story, but you don't really need to translate the German in order to, like, get that he's in trouble, basically. So, Field, back when he was an SHR, thought this was supposed to be like a comedy moment. Like, he sent me some messages on Discord saying, like, oh, I thought this was a comedy movie because everyone was speaking to him in foreign languages. And no, it is not a comedy. Well, it's funny, but in different ways, depending on the context. So then we get to this shot, and you can tell there's an edge to the building that I made because it kind of slopes down, like especially on the left and right side. It's a little bit wider than, like, this shot is a little bit wider than the shot that's in the main cut. So then we also get this shot, which shows what the original flying cars looked like, and this was just a straight up free model. No shame, just ripped it off. I ended up, like, making them black and metallic and also adding some, like, red and blue lights to the front of it. So that way they actually look like police cars instead of just, like, futuristic cars. And so it flies towards the building, and then we get different angles of the same building, but they're different in the main cut. So there's that. Then this section of the movie where he enters the office is pretty much the same as it is in the main cut too. I think I increased the size of the text boxes, like made them a little bit wider and taller for each one. And that's just a personal preference thing. I like it when things have breathing room inside of boxes. I don't know. I guess it's hard to explain that. I like this shot. This is probably one of my favorite shots that, like, out of this movie. And there's a lot about Atmospheria that I think aged poorly, but I like this shot. The composition is good, and I like the fact that it's like a close-up of the back of his head. Yeah. Adds to some of the mystery. Now, I'm guessing people have had some trouble about how to pronounce the name Suypur. I guess Suypur comes from, like, it's like an Asian name, but I'm gonna be honest with you. The names Suypur, Korb, and Zob were all made, like, as a joke, because someone in another Discord server that I'm in called me Suypur, like, spelled like that, Suypur. And I thought, that's a funny name, I'm gonna use it. Korb is literally just corn, but just spelled differently. But yeah, there's no meaning behind the names, they're just jokes. And that's why I think they're kind of forgettable names. But yeah. The Rat King was another name that was kind of made up as a joke, but it was also kind of an interesting name because I looked up what a Rat King is, and it's basically when a litter of rats inside of a womb are tied together by the tail. And if you ever look up an image for that, it is kind of creepy, but it's nothing too bad. Yeah, I liked the name the Rat King because it's kind of like the king of the rats, the king of the underground, and it's kind of a fitting name for the story. Oh yeah, this is supposed to be a yellow border. I should probably add that. Where's a yellow picture I can steal from? Yeah, this box should be yellow. Alright, let's start that from the top. Anyway, so getting on to this part, the original idea was that Rat King was supposed to be like someone who starts a rebellion, and that's why they're going after him in the first place. But I ended up changing that to like he's a criminal, and he's just like a 2-bit thief. Pretty much he just like hires other people to rob for him, and he reaps the rewards. Like by criminal standards, he isn't a good criminal in that regard because he doesn't do anything himself. He's just kind of like forcing other people to do his dirty work, and he's getting the benefit of it. And that's part of the reason why he's called the Rat King, is because he's the king of the rats. He's the king of the underground. So after that, pretty much the same from here on in. They have their little bicker, and you know, this part of the scene is ripped straight from Seven, like the movie. So there's a moment where Detective Mills in Seven kind of steps up for himself and says like, hey, look, you can just transfer it to me, I can handle it. But then the superior officer just shoots him down, basically. So, you know, they're chilling at their desks, they're having a grand old time. And this is something that I wanted to show in the film, was like the fact that majority of detectives' work is just doing paperwork. But all the fun happens when they're out in the streets and firing their guns and everything. So this part, up to this part, is where it's the same. But then it changes. So instead of receiving a call from Detective Anderson like he does in the main cut, he receives a call from his wife, and you'll see that in a second. So the yellow borders means that I recycled these images for the main cut. So at least I got some use out of these images. I didn't have to reshoot everything. So right here is where it goes straight into wife cut territory. There is no equivalent to this shot or this shot in the main cut. And this scene is also ripped straight from Seven because in the movie, Detective Mills' wife calls Mills while he's at work, and she asks to be put on the phone with Detective Somerset. And so Corb is basically Somerset, and Suypur is Mills. And then Captain Zob out in the main office is the superior officer to the both of them. I forget his name, but I'm sure I'll remember it. So Corb calls Suypur's wife, whom I didn't really give a name, now that I think about it. Yeah, and then right here it kind of goes back into theatrical territory, but with different text. I like this line. Are you serious? Like, he's been so formal and just like trying to be presentable, and then he just throws it all out the window to say, are you serious? I think that's funny. All right, now we're in true wife cut territory. So right now they're outside of the apartment of Suypur and his wife. And I had built this whole apartment to, have this one scene. And then it ended up getting thrown away. I couldn't reuse the apartment for anything in the regular movie, which is a bit of a shame, but it only took like a day to build. It's no big deal. So then we see her for the first time, rocking the tube top and the ripped up jeans. You can tell they're a young couple. It's kind of like she's straight out of college. And that's kind of how it was in 7 as well, I think. They may have been a little bit older in the movie. So the reason why she calls him Mr. Korb is because Korb is not his first name. Korb is his last name. His first name is actually Ashton. Ashton Korb, that is this guy's name. And I gave him a tick to say howdy, and I guess I don't really have a reason why. I just like that idea that like someone from the city would unironically say howdy. I don't know. And then he says this line, and this is where you think like, oh great, they have kids. But no. It's just dogs. They treat their dogs as children. Yeah. And so Korb goes looking around the apartment. He finds some interesting things. He sees that they have like a couch set up, and they got a dining room, and they got like a painting of a rainbow zebra. I have no reason why they have a rainbow zebra painting on the mantle. I just thought it looked cool. It added a little bit of color to this apartment. Not a lot, but just enough. Like, if I made the scene like I made the scenes for for Inverter, then I would have added a lot more detail into this apartment, make it look a little bit more lively. So then she asks him a question, and if you take a glance to the left, like just outside the window, you can see it looks kind of blue outside, and that's because I wanted to make it so that no matter what angle you looked through the windows, you could always see a building in the background. So that meant having to like have a super huge building behind the windows, and that meant it had to be outdoors. So the way Roblox lighting works is like there's ambient light, and ambient light is always the color of the skybox, and the skybox that I was using was blue. So it looks kind of blue outside, but I wanted it to be yellow. I couldn't really control that. At least not with the knowledge that I had then. I could probably do it now if I wanted to. So she asked him a question, and have you ever had to fire your gun? This line is also ripped straight out of 7, because this is similar to a question that Mill's wife asks Somerset in the movie, and he gives the same response a few times, always with purpose. And this is why I'm kind of sad that the wife cut is gone, because he offers some insight into what it's like to be an older detective, is because like he has a little bit more experience with when and when not to fire the gun. And you'll see why this is brought up later. No spoilers yet. So they have their conversation, and then he says this line, and this kind of ties it all together. They want to save it for when they want it instead of when it's needed. And I guess that was the original point of the story, was that, like, Suypur wanted to use his gun instead of needing to use his gun. So steak and potatoes, there's actually a little bit of a fun story behind this. So my dad has told me a story about a neighbor that he grew up with, or like a neighbor in his town that, like, he grew up. Anyway, this old man, this like World War II veteran, always ate steak and potatoes every night without question. This old man in this town, wherever it is, always ate steak and potatoes for dinner. And I thought that'd be funny to add that, even if it's just like a joke that only I would be able to understand. It's just steak and potatoes. Burnt to a crisp or bloody as hell. That line actually comes straight from Pulp Fiction. And, you know, Corp, he's a man of culture. He likes his steaks bloody as hell. And this frame in particular is one that Louis wanted me to edit, but I explained to him that, like, I put the phrase bloody as hell through a tag filter on Roblox, and it said it was okay, so I put it in. Because this is the one line that I figure would have gotten me in trouble had it been uploaded to Roblox, but, you know, apparently you can say hell on Roblox if you're over the age of 13. But now that they've added a age rating to the games, I wouldn't have been able to done this. At least if it had been done, it wouldn't have been able to be kept. So part of me is glad that the wife cut doesn't exist, because we end up getting this really stale conversation. None of them have their arms extended out over the table. And so they're just sitting there like so. And it looks kind of plain. Like, if I had modeled this in the same style as Inverter, they would have had like a slightly different arm pose for each frame. But there's only like 10 of them anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So in the dinner scene in 7, Somerset asks a similar question that Corb is asking right now, and they get the exact same reason. So literally all I did for this was just added motion blur in Photoshop, and I edited the picture in Photoshop, added some motion blur up and down to make it look like the whole apartment was rumbling. And I guess you would be confused if you saw this for the first time, but it's explained in the next line anyway. Yeah, the blue line of the city streams run down our street. I've lived in Boston for like a few months several years ago, and I lived in an apartment with my dad and my stepmom and all these other siblings of mine. And we had an apartment that was right next to the blue line. And the blue line was very loud and always operated at like the worst times of the day. So yeah, I let out some of my anger into this. Also, I just notice how ginormous the cups are compared to them. Like, the cup is basically as big as their head. That is a big cup. And this line also comes straight out of 7. And if you watch the original scene in 7, you'll understand why this line is so funny. Because Detective Somerset is played by Morgan Freeman. Morgan Freeman has the most hilarious laugh of all time. And I wanted to try to capture on that, but I can't really do that in Roblox. I literally just had to add a text box saying laughs. But anyway, that's the end of the dinner scene. So then we move straight into things we're familiar for, and you'll see a green border around this picture. You may be confused why, because it looks pretty similar. Is the fact that there's fog in the frame. Like, if you look at this scene, this exact same frame in the main cut, there won't be any fog, and it'll just be like darker blacks. And you'll see what I mean. So we see this guy in a dumpster looking for shoes. There's an unwritten rule of homeless culture that says if you find a pair of shoes in a garbage that aren't your size and match, then you leave them off to the side. And that's something that I wrote into the script, and that's something that I modeled for this scene. But I didn't really dive into it too much because I didn't really think it was that important to the overall story. It's just a fun detail that I added. So yeah, he finds his pairs of shoes, and this scene kind of goes exactly the same as it does in the main cut. There was actually a point where Louis made me edit out this frame, and even though this frame is in both cuts, this frame had to be edited because originally Corb pushed the homeless guy straight up against the wall using his arms. And you can kind of take that the wrong way if you've got a dirty mind for it, but I just switched it over to Corb just points his gun at him, which seems a little bit more intense, but there's something a little bit more personal about like holding someone up by the collar against a wall. It's like you're more angry at someone when you do that instead of pointing your gun at them, but compromises had to be made. So exact same line, except for this. There's Louis didn't like the framing of this particular shot because Corb and the homeless guy were too close together, and he assumed that Roblox may get some bad ideas about it. So I ended up changing it so that Corb is standing a little bit farther out, and I just changed the angle to make it look like there's more distance between Corb and the homeless guy. So and then we get to this part, pretty much the same. Suypur enters the club. It's completely empty. In the script, the club was supposed to be packed, like full of people. But that meant animating hundreds of figures, and I didn't want to do that. I got lazy. So I just had to be empty because, that's a trope switch right there, is the fact that like the club is empty instead of packed. Because usually whenever detectives enter a club like this, it's always full, and they have to chase their bad guy through a crowd of people. And it becomes a moral question of, do you push aside innocent people to catch the one bad guy? But without any people in the club, that pretty much goes out the window. Oh, and then the 3 X symbols in the back, that is something I'm gonna look into when Inverter is released, because Inverter is kind of set in the same universe as Atmospheria, but just like 30 years apart. So the 3 X's in the back, the 3 red X symbols, they don't really mean anything. And I looked up if they exist, and they don't really, at least not in any bad context. Like, it's not like a swastika, but yeah, They don't really exist in real life. So he finds the stairs. He's gonna go upstairs. He finds the apartment. Like, the main difference I wanted to put out was that the Rat King's apartment is a lot more clean looking than Suypur's apartment. But yeah, it's just like a lot more clean, a lot more well lit, and everything is like white and black furniture. Main thing is it's just supposed to look a lot nicer. And in the main cut of the film, this difference is kind of dialed up actually, because Suypur's apartment in the main cut is very gray on purpose, because gray looks bland, and Suypur in the main cut is a bland person. Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit. So this is the exact same line as it is in the main cut, but then it changes right here. And there's no real difference between this version and the main cut, but just the wording is slightly different, and so that's why I added the yellow box. So, threats of rebellion and treason. I feel like this is a terrible reason to arrest someone, but you know, it's a cyberpunk future. People can be arrested for anything. Who cares? I don't really like this line, and I'm glad I changed it for the main cut, but yeah. Says the exact same thing here. Says the exact same thing here. You'll see in the very back corner, especially in the right side of the picture, you'll see a very out of focus homeless man, like the same homeless man as before. So, you know, Corp comes in, saves the day, tackles the guy. For some reason, I really like this shot because it looks the most like a shot from Inverter, I guess. Just the way it's lit. There's a lot more shadow across Suypur's face and torso. Like, if you look at the way everyone is lit up until this point, everyone is very clean lit. There's very little shadow, except for, like, around the chin. But then you get to this part, and half of his face is in darkness. I really like that. So I added some motion blur to the Rat King right here to highlight the idea that he's, like, flying through the window. So then he sees a pile of garbage below. He dives, lands back first into the pile of garbage. That's a really terrible way to land into a pile of garbage, by the way, because if there's anything sharp, it will go straight through your back and you are a dead man. So don't try that at home, kids. So he runs off and gets to the window. But then this line right here changes. Instead of... So here he says, go chase him. But in the main cut, he says, well, then go get to the car. Or something like that. And the original thing that I had in mind for this scene was that Suypur, like, ran after him on foot. And I had that whole scene planned out. But I got a bit lazy because I didn't really want to build more buildings just to have a foot chase. And they were supposed to fly in the car in the original script too, and I'm glad that I added it into the main cut. You'll see why in a second. So it goes on foot, but he's already disappeared. I like this shot too. I got the lighting really good. So instead of a car chase, like in the main cut, they just have an argument in the front building. Homeless Joe. Yeah, Homeless Joe was the guy's name in the script, and it was also a nickname that I gave him, like, throughout the movie. But yeah, in the movie he doesn't. Well, in the main cut, he doesn't have a name. So they have their argument. Blah 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 blah. ESU. That stands for something that I don't remember, but it's basically like a special unit meant for like heavy backup. I don't know. I'm sure I'll put up like what it means. So you go straight to this scene, and this scene is slightly different in the wife cut. Like there's different lines being thrown around. So this, I'm pretty sure he says something about crashing the car, but since the car doesn't exist in this cut, it's just like him being sorry for yelling. Like the way I have Corb in my mind is that Corb isn't someone who likes to yell. He's just like trying to be a good leader figure, but doesn't want to like be too bad about disciplining. So I think this is pretty much the same as it is in the main cut, but it's just like worded differently. No big deal. So here's where it starts to deviate. My wife's been missing for a few days. Part of me is glad she's gone. The other part is worried and wants to find her. I don't really like how this is worded, but it doesn't matter anyway because it doesn't exist. And so, yeah, it's kind of bringing up the idea that they aren't exactly happy with each other, like Suypur and his wife. So Corb tries to console him, I guess. But this is kind of along the lines of what happened in 7 as well. Like, Detective Mills and his wife aren't exactly happy with each other either. But yeah, not getting enough sleep. This is another reference back to the train running down the street of their apartment. But I didn't really like explicitly state that. I just rather the audience like infer it from what they know. Like, listen, if there's a train running down the street where you live, you wouldn't be able to get any sleep either. Okay, so maybe she checked into a hotel for a few days. This is something that happened in real life, actually. Like, not to get too personal, but basically my stepmother decided to like get a hotel for herself for a few days just to get out of the house. And I'm sure there's some deeper meaning in there, but I don't want to ask about it, and I don't think it should really be brought up again. Yeah. So I wanted to kind of dig into my own life for this particular moment. But, you know, he's a good sport about it. He wants to talk. Yeah. And then it goes back into what we're familiar with the main cut. Yeah, ready? Yeah, go. I really don't like the muzzle flash. It is so out of place. Well, all the muzzle flashes in Atmospheria were added in, like, either with Photoshop or just straight into Google Slides. And they don't really look that good. But, you know what? It's a crappy Roblox movie. Who cares? Okay. Pretty much the same here, too. This staircase was fun to shoot. Let me tell you about it. Basically, I had built one flight of stairs. And if you notice very carefully, there's actually two separate spirals going up with each other, and it's all meant to look like one big spiral, so there's actually half of the amount of floors that you would think there are. I don't know. It's kind of complicated, but if you notice very closely, there's two separate spirals of stairs going up intertwined with each other. So you may be confused why this is in green. And that's because in Atmospheria, if I go over to it, yeah, right here. I don't know if you can tell the difference, but in the wife cut, the hand is slightly larger. And I'll show you why in a second. So if we switch between the two wife cut hands, the hand is roughly the same size. So then we go to the Atmospheria, or the main cut. The hand changes size ever so slightly, just enough to barely notice it. But there's a reason why I changed it for the main cut, and it's because in photography there's a concept called lens breathing, and what lens breathing means is when you rack focus, or when you change focus from very far away to very close, the object in the frame changes, like zoom a little bit, because all focusing is just zooming ever so slightly just to get the focus right. So I wanted to have lens breathing in Atmospheria, even though only I notice it. I still think it's cool to have, but yeah, the wife cut does not have lens breathing. And it looks a little bit cleaner in the wife cut, but I like the version in Atmospheria a little bit more, just because I think it's a little bit more photographically correct. This giant building was also fun to build, because I really like the sense of scale that it provides to the scene. It makes a really good background. So, rooftop scene is where things really start to get crazy. So, this line is kind of changed for the main cut. No big deal. But yeah, it's right about here where things start to deviate pretty intensely. So the final scene is where everything ties together. Everything like comes together and explodes in conflict. But in the main cut, none of the tension is really there, because all they're doing is just like catching a criminal. But you'll see why it's so intense. So he's making jabs about Suypur's wife. Blah, 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 Miranda writes. Let me know when your partner gets up here. I have a surprise for him in the hanging plants. I don't know if you can see the box. No, you can't see the box. Oh, that's a continuity error right there. The ESU are on their way up. Pretty much the same as it is. But then alright, yeah, here is where it starts to like go downhill fast. So Corb thinks that whatever box is in the hanging plants is a bomb, because that's what typically there would be. But in this case, it's slightly different. Louis sent this picture to me. He like screenshot it from the slideshow that I sent him, and sent it back to me and said like, ooh. Yeah, that made me proud as a filmmaker, because it meant I was getting the right reaction out of him. So this scene is also kind of ripped straight from 7, but instead of on a rooftop, they're out in the middle of a field. So he's like, no, don't open the box. And Rat King is all like, hey, you'll hate me for it, but you'll love me. I don't like this close-up. This is meant to be like the revealing moment when all of it snaps together, but I don't like this close-up mainly because of the color of the light on the side of his face. It's white, even though all of the other light in the scene is like red or orangish. Yeah, it's kind of noticeable when it's pointed out, but I don't really like it. I like this shot, or at least the composition of it, because it's the gun pointing straight down at Rat King. So, yeah, here's where it boils. Points the gun, takes the shot. Rat King is dead instantly. So, even though this shot looks pretty similar to a shot in the main cut, it's slightly different because, first of all, there's the box in the background, like in the very bottom left. But, yeah. I'm getting tired. So, I think this is funny because the very trash pile that saved him at the middle of the movie is the very trash pile that killed him at the end of the movie. So, they go back to the office, and Captain Zob has his discussion with Suypur. And the reason why I was sad about the wife cut needing to be cut out was because of this end scene, actually, because it takes out all of the tension. In the main cut, we have this unnamed, unknown officer who's been working behind the scenes the whole time, named Detective Anderson. And, Anderson was kind of like a fill-in for Suypur's wife, because without Suypur's wife's remains in that box up at the rooftop, there was no reason for them to be up there besides just, they're catching a criminal. So that's why the wife cut feels a little bit more impactful for me, even though there's some stuff in here that I don't really like today. And yeah, pretty much the same. He walks away in shame. Okay, here's a fun detail. You can see he's walking away right here. So then it cuts over to these two, and then it cuts back here. You could see Suypur in the very left of the frame, just walking away still. And that's a detail that I added in that I figure only me and 2 other people would be able to see. But now that you know. So this picture is pretty much the same, but with different text. And this is something that, so when I said at the very beginning of this why I didn't keep the shot of the Asturian Legion headquarters is because the roof that I built for the offices are sloped. But if you look at the building at the very beginning of the slideshow, there are no slopes. It's just a big square, basically. A very different ending shot, too. Instead of having a white car flying away, which was supposed to be Corb's car, it's just a closing shot of the city. That's it. That's the wife cut for you. So, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. And yeah, go have a good day or whatever. Bon voyage.